Welcome back to Poirot Files. Today we're diving into an intriguing mystery, Hercule Poirot and the skeleton that didn't belong in the grave. A tale of deception, secrets, and Poirot's brilliant investigative mind. But before that, I want to say, you've shown me so much love and I truly appreciate it. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Grab your coffee and let's get started. Chapter 1. The Uneasy Burial. The morning fog had yet to lift when I arrived in the small village of Westley. Its ancient streets, quiet and untouched by the bustle of modern life, had the air of a place frozen in time. The damp mist clung to the stone buildings, blurring the outlines of the market square, while a quiet reverence seemed to hang over the cobbled streets, as though the village had secrets it was reluctant to share. I had been summoned here by an urgent letter, one that contained no more than a few terse words. "A matter of great importance, Monsieur Poirot. Your expertise is required. Please come at once." It was signed by none other than Inspector Caldwell, a local police officer whom I had worked with on a previous case. The village cemetery was located just outside of town, nestled between the tangled branches of ancient oak trees. Their gnarled limbs formed a protective canopy over the graves, some of which had stood for centuries, marking the final resting places of long-forgotten souls. I had not expected to find much. After all, a cemetery is a place of peace, a place where life and death coexist in a quiet, respectful harmony. But as I approached the edge of the graveyard, I noticed a small group of villagers gathered around a freshly dug grave. They stood in hushed silence, their faces pale and drawn, as if the very ground they stood upon had betrayed them. "Ah, mon ami," I said softly to myself, recognizing the telltale signs of something far from ordinary. There was a stillness here, the kind of silence that only accompanies the discovery of something hidden, something not meant to be found. Stepped closer, my shoes crunching on the gravel path, and soon found myself at the edge of the grave. The grave digger, a wiry man with a sullen expression, was carefully working to lift the casket from the earth. He paused when he saw me approach, wiping his brow with a grimy handkerchief. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, I did not expect you so soon," the gravedigger said, his voice cracking under the weight of his own tension. It's a most unusual situation." "Unusual, you say?" I replied, my voice steady as I surveyed the scene with keen eyes. The grave had been opened, its contents exposed, yet something about the sight before me seemed wrong. The casket itself was old, decayed, with rusted hinges and a faded plaque barely readable. But that was not what caught my attention. No, it was the extra set of bones beside the casket, bones that had no business being there. "You see, Monsieur Poirot," the gravedigger continued, his hands trembling, "this grave belonged to Lord Whitcomb's great-grandfather, an old family burial. But when we dug deeper—" His voice trailed off, and he glanced nervously at the crowd. "We found this." He pointed to the uncovered remains, and I stepped closer, examining them with a measured gaze. The bones were not those of a man long dead, as one might expect in such an old grave. No, these were more recent, far too recent to belong in a centuries-old family plot. I leaned down, my eyes narrowing as I inspected the skeletal remains. The bones were well preserved, suggesting they were not more than 10 years old, perhaps even less. The style of the clothing that had once accompanied the remains, though now tattered and indistinct, suggested a woman, or possibly a young girl. "Mon Dieu," I murmured under my breath. "This is no accident." The gravedigger's expression faltered as he looked at me. "But what does it mean, Monsieur Poirot? What does this "This skeleton mean—" I straightened up and turned toward the inspector, who had been standing in the background, his brow furrowed in concern. Inspector Caldwell was a man of methodical disposition, and I had worked with him before. He was good at his job, but the look in his eyes told me that even he was at a loss. "Inspector, what can you tell me about this grave?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "It's Lord Whitcomb's family burial site, as I said," Caldwell replied. "This grave, its burial has been undisturbed for generations. We've never had any reason to suspect foul play, but now, with the discovery of the second skeleton—" His voice trailed off as he looked at the remains with disbelief. "It doesn't make sense, Poirot. There's no record of anyone being buried here other than the Whitcomb ancestors." I nodded thoughtfully, my mind already racing through the air possibilities. "Have there been any recent disturbances in the village? Any rumors? Any stories of people going missing?" The inspector shook his head. "No, nothing at all. In fact, the villagers are rather quiet and reserved, but this discovery has everyone on edge." I turned to the gathered villagers, who had remained silent up until this point, murmuring amongst themselves in low voices. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and fear. One of them, a woman with a pale, pinched face, caught my eye and quickly looked away, as though guilty of some hidden sin. "Ah," I murmured. "It seems the good people of Westley have secrets of their own." I stepped forward and addressed the crowd, my voice carrying across the cemetery. "Mes amis," I said, my accent noticeable but not harsh, "I must ask you all to remain calm. The discovery of this skeleton is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. For now I suggest you all return to your homes. It is my belief that the truth behind this matter lies not in what you see, but in what you have not yet seen." As the villagers began to disperse, Caldwell walked over to me, his brow still furrowed with worry. "What do you think, Poirot? Do you think this is the work of someone in the village?" "I cannot say yet," I replied, my eyes still fixed on the grave. "But I do believe, Inspector, that the answers lie within these very bones, and it is up to me to uncover the truth." I turned to him, my gaze sharp. "The game is afoot, mon ami. We must waste no time in our investigation." As we walked away from the graveyard, I felt the weight of the mystery pressing on my shoulders. The skeleton that didn't belong in the grave had spoken its silent truth, and it was my task, my duty, to listen. And, as always, I would use my little grey cells to solve this puzzle. The fog began to lift, but the truth remained shrouded in darkness. I could already sense that the clues would be elusive, that the villagers would be less than forthcoming, and that this case would be far more complicated than it first appeared. But I would solve it, just as I had solved so many before. For now, the only thing I knew for certain was that the grave held more than the remains of an old family. It held a mystery, and mysteries, as I well knew, were best left to Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2. The Curious Villagers and Secrets of the Past. The morning after the discovery in the graveyard, the sun broke through the lingering fog, casting a dim but steady light over the village of Westley. I was met by my old friend Captain Hastings, who had arrived at my request to assist me in the investigation. His ever-optimistic demeanour was a contrast to the heavy atmosphere of the village, and I knew that his presence would be of great help in navigating the social intricacies of this quiet town. "We must make inquiries, Hastings," I said, adjusting my gloves as we stepped into the village square. "The key to understanding this mystery lies not in the bones themselves, but in the lives of those who have walked these streets for so many years." Hastings nodded, his face serious despite his usual cheerful disposition. Indeed, Poirot, the villagers must know something, but they aren't likely to share it easily. Ah, but that is where my little grey cells come into play, mon ami, I replied with a hint of a smile. They may not speak openly, but I have a way of making them. Our first visit was to Lord Whitcomb, whose family plot had housed the unexpected skeleton. His manor stood at the edge of the village, a large stone house with ivy creeping up its walls, the kind of place where generations of aristocrats had lived and died. As we were ushered into the study, Lord Whitcomb appeared, a tall, thin man, his features sharp and aristocratic, his expression one of quiet melancholy. "I am glad you could come so quickly, Monsieur Poirot," Lord Whitcomb said, his voice rich but tinged with an unspoken sadness. "I can hardly comprehend what has happened. My family has been buried in that plot for centuries. To find such a thing, it is unthinkable." "Indeed," I agreed, offering a polite smile. "It is a most disturbing discovery, one that must be understood. But I must ask you, Lord Whitcomb, how well do you know the history of your family? Could there be, perhaps, someone distant, who might have been buried there without your knowledge?" His brow furrowed as he considered the question. "I know the history of my family well. We are a long line dating back to the Norman conquest. But I confess there are gaps. The family records have not always been well kept. It is possible that there is some forgotten relative, but no one from the last 200 years, I can assure you." "Then I must ask you, Lord Whitcomb, if you are aware of any recent disturbances around the graveyard, perhaps someone who might have had an interest in the plot." He shook his head slowly. "No, we have always been respectful of the graves, as you would expect. The only visitors to the cemetery are the villagers, and they have no reason to disturb such a place." "Thank you," I said, standing up from the chair where I had been seated. "You have been most helpful, Lord Whitcomb, but I believe we must look beyond your family's history and inquire further into the life of the village itself." As we left the study, Hastings caught my eye, his expression thoughtful. "You don't think Lord Whitcomb is hiding something, do you, Poirot?" "I do not know yet, mon ami," I replied. "But I sense that the answers to this mystery lie in the village itself, not in the nobleman's manor. We must speak to the villagers. Someone knows more than they are letting on." Our next stop was the village doctor, Dr. Stephen Harding, a man of middling age with the quiet, professional demeanour of someone who had seen far more than most would ever know. His small, neat clinic was tucked behind a row of cottages, the kind of place where one would expect to find remedies for minor ailments rather than the weighty matters of life and death. "Ah, Poirot," Dr. Harding said as he greeted us, his handshake firm but brief. "You must forgive me for not visiting you earlier. I have been quite busy with the villagers, you see. They are uneasy with the recent events. It is not every day that a family grave is disturbed." "Indeed," I replied, leaning slightly forward. "But I have a question for you, Dr. Harding. Has anything unusual happened in the village recently? Any illnesses, disappearances, or accidents that might be linked to the graveyard?" The doctor hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering toward the window as if searching for the right words. "I can think of nothing untoward in recent memory. Of course, there are always the usual ailments, colds, coughs, a few sprains, but nothing remarkable. Not even any unexplained deaths?" I pressed, my tone casual but insistent. Dr. Harding stiffened, and his hand rested on the edge of his desk, his fingers twitching slightly. "I must confess, Poirot, there was one incident It was several years ago now, but there was a man, local, a labourer, who died unexpectedly. There was talk of something strange in the air at the time, though I never put much stock in it. People are prone to superstition, you know. And this man, do you remember his name? I asked, my voice low and even. James Porter, he said, his eyes narrowing as he recalled the memory. He was a quiet sort, no family, no close ties. He worked the fields for Lord Whitcomb, but nothing about his death seemed particularly odd. I signed the death certificate myself. Interesting, I muttered, turning away from the doctor's desk. Thank you, Dr. Harding. You have been most helpful. We shall continue our inquiries. As we exited the doctor's office, I could see Hastings' face darkening with thought. Poirot, you think the death of this man has something to do with the skeleton in the grave? I do not know yet, I replied, my thoughts already churning. But it is a piece of the puzzle, Hastings, and we must not ignore it. The next visit took us to the village vicar, Reverend Jonathan Phelps. He was a tall, austere man with sharp features and a demeanour that seemed almost too formal for a rural parish. His church, like most in such villages, was ancient, the stone walls thick with centuries of history, its interior dim and reverent. "Ah, Poirot," Reverend Phelps said, greeting us with a stiff nod. "You are here about the unpleasantness in the graveyard, I presume?" "Indeed, mon ami," I said, stepping into the cold stone church. "I must ask you, has there ever been anything in the history of this village that could explain the presence of such a body? Is there a darker side to Westley's past that we should know of?" The vicar's lips tightened as he regarded me. "We are a peaceful village, Monsieur Poirot. The graveyard has always been a place of peace and reflection. There is nothing to suggest that anything untoward has ever happened here." "But there must be something, no?" I pressed, my gaze sharp. "A secret, perhaps? A hidden history?" Reverend Phelps shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the altar, as if seeking refuge in its solemnity. "I know nothing of such things. If there were something hidden, it is not my place to say." "And yet, Reverend, you know that a lie by omission is still a lie," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What are you hiding, I wonder?" He cleared his throat and looked away. I have no secrets, Monsieur Poirot. You must understand, I simply do not know." When we arrived at her cottage, she was standing in the doorway as if she had been waiting for us. Her expression was one of curiosity mixed with something else, something that seemed almost like apprehension. "Ah, Poirot, back again so soon," she said with a forced smile. "What more can I tell you? I've already told you everything I know about Lord Whitcomb and his family." "You have indeed, Mrs. Weston," I replied. "But there is one more question I must ask you. Have you ever seen anyone act strangely around the graveyard? Perhaps someone who seemed out of place?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, and I saw the briefest flash of something. Guilt? Fear? It was gone in an instant, but I had seen it. "Strange?" she repeated, her voice rising with uncertainty. No, I don't think so. It's all very peaceful around here. People come and go, of course, but no one out of the ordinary. But there is something you are not telling me, is there, Mrs. Weston?" I pressed, my gaze steady. "You know more than you admit." She swallowed hard, her throat working as if she were trying to keep something down. After a long pause, she spoke, again her voice a whisper. "I did see something once. A man standing by the graveyard late at night. I thought it was nothing, just someone out for a walk, but I never saw him again. and I never thought to mention it. What does it matter now with all this trouble?" Hastings looked at me, his brow furrowed. "A man? Do you think he could be connected to the murder?" "I don't know, Hastings," I said, turning back to Mrs. Weston. "But I believe you are hiding something, Mrs. Weston, and I will find out what it is." She paled under my scrutiny and quickly changed the subject, as if attempting to redirect our attention. "I don't know anything more, I swear it." "Perhaps you should speak to Dr. Harding again. He's the one with the answers." I felt the weight of her words hang in the air, but I knew she had given me a clue, deliberate or not. Someone had been at the graveyard late at night, and that person was significant. As we left Mrs. Weston's house, Hastings muttered under his breath, "Poirot, do you think she's involved? She certainly acted like someone who's hiding something." "I do not know yet, mon ami," I replied. "But there is more to this village than meets the eye. We will need to tread carefully." We walked through the village square in silence, the weight of the mystery growing heavier with every passing step. The villagers were all too eager to talk, at least on the surface, but I knew better than to take everything at face value. There were secrets here, buried beneath layers of civility and quiet routines, and as always, I would trust my little grey cells to find the truth. As we made our way toward our next interview, a sudden thought struck me and I stopped abruptly. "Hastings," I said, turning to my companion, "do you realize what this means?" "What, Poirot?" Hastings asked, looking puzzled. "If the bones were buried only recently, that means someone was willing to kill to keep them hidden. And that means we are not dealing with an isolated act of violence. No, my friend, we are dealing with something much more dangerous, a conspiracy. And I believe that before this is over, we will uncover more than one murderer." Hastings' face hardened. "You think there's more than one person involved?" "Indeed, Hastings, and we will find them. But we must act swiftly, for the more we uncover, the more perilous our path becomes." With that, we set off again, the mystery deepening with every step. Chapter 4. The mysterious disappearance. As the day wore on, I found myself increasingly restless. The village of Westley, so quiet and seemingly serene, was proving to be anything but. Every glance from the villagers, every whispered conversation, seemed to carry weight, as though each person knew more than they let on. It was becoming clear that the murder we were investigating was merely the surface of a much deeper and more troubling mystery. Hastings and I had returned to the village centre, hoping to find further clues. The idea of a conspiracy, perhaps involving several villagers, gnawed at my mind. There was one thread, however, that had begun to tug at me ever since Dr. Harding's revelation about the bones. The story of a young maid named Lillian Parsons, who had disappeared from the Whitcomb estate 10 years ago. Could the skeleton belong to her? The thought haunted me as I made my way to Lord Whitcomb's residence once more. Lord Whitcomb had always been a reserved man, aloof even by the standards of the British aristocracy. He was the type of nobleman who saw the maintenance of a carefully curated image as paramount. Yet beneath the composed exterior there was something about him that suggested a troubled conscience. I had hoped that a second meeting would yield some new insight, but I could not shake the feeling that he was withholding something important. The estate was as grand as ever, though the passage of time had left its mark. The once pristine lawn were now slightly overgrown, and the hedgerows had begun to lose their former sharp lines, as if the estate itself was no longer quite as carefully maintained as it had been in its prime. When the butler ushered us into Lord Whitcomb's study, the man himself rose from behind his desk with a practised smile. "Ah, Poirot, Captain Hastings," he greeted us. though his eyes darted nervously to the window as if to ensure no one overheard. "I trust you're making progress with your investigation. I do hope the matter is resolved swiftly. It would be a pity to allow the village to remain in such turmoil." "Indeed, Lord Whitcomb, the matter must be resolved," I replied, my voice measured. "But there are some things I must ask you about. You see, we have come upon some information that might be of great importance. Tell me, Lord Whitcomb, what can you tell me about Lillian Parsons?" The mention of the maid's name had an immediate effect on the nobleman. His composure faltered, if only for a moment. The mask he had so carefully constructed slipped, revealing a trace of unease beneath. "Lillian Parsons," Lord Whitcomb repeated, his voice strained. "What on earth makes you ask about her? She was merely a servant, a young girl who disappeared." "From your estate 10 years ago, yes?" I interrupted, my tone soft but firm. "People in the village remember her well. Some think she ran away, others—" I let the sentence hang in the air, my gaze fixed on the man before me. Lord Whitcomb's jaw tightened, and he took a slow step back, his gaze now flicking to a portrait on the wall, as though he needed to steady himself before speaking further. "Her disappearance was a personal tragedy, Monsieur Poirot. There is nothing more to say about it. She was a simple maid who grew tired of the life she had here, and one day she left. I have no idea where she went or why. It is as simple as that." I watched him carefully. There was something about his tone, something too rehearsed, too dismissive. A man who had nothing to hide would not speak with such irritation at the mere mention of a long-gone servant. I could see that the memory of Lillian Parsons troubled him more than he was willing to admit. "That is an interesting explanation," I said quietly. "But I wonder, Lord Whitcomb, do you really believe she simply left of her own accord?" The nobleman stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "I'm afraid I must ask you to refrain from making such implications," he said coldly. "My family has no reason to be involved in any sordid affair. Lillian was just a maid. There is nothing more to discuss." The finality in his tone left no room for further discussion, but I was undeterred. There was something in his manner, something in the way he evaded my questions, that pointed to a deeper truth. Lord Whitcomb was hiding something, and I would uncover it, one way or another. I rose from my chair, signaling to Hastings that it was time to leave. As we made our way back to the door, I gave the nobleman one last look, my eyes narrowing in contemplation. "You would be wise to remember, Lord Whitcomb," I said, my voice steady but carrying a weight of meaning, "that sometimes the past has a way of coming back to haunt us, no matter how much we wish it to stay buried." Lord Whitcomb said nothing in response, but his gaze followed us as we left, the door closing with a faint click behind us. Once outside, Hastings looked at me, concern etched on his face. "Poirot, do you think Whitcomb knows more than he's letting on?" "Without question," I replied. "But it is not yet clear what he knows, or what he is hiding. We must find out more about Lillian Parsons, about the circumstances of her disappearance. It is the key to understanding the mystery we are dealing with." Our next stop was the local inn, a small, quaint establishment that had once been a lively hub for villagers and travellers alike. Now, however, it seemed more like a place for whispered conversations and half-hearted greetings. The innkeeper, an aging man with a gruff demeanour, had been working at the establishment for many years, and I hoped he might have information about Lillian that others had overlooked. He was behind the bar when we entered, polishing a glass with mechanical precision. He looked up as we approached, his eyes flicking warily over us. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice gruff. "I have a few questions about Lillian's Parsons, I said, watching him closely. I understand she used to work for Lord Whitcomb, but disappeared a decade ago. Do you recall anything about her? The innkeeper paused, his face momentarily frozen in thought. Then, with a sigh, he set the glass down and wiped his hands on a rag. Ah, Lillian, yes, I remember her well enough. She was a pretty thing, quiet though, not one to make a fuss. But, well, she had a lot of dreams, I suppose. Talked a lot about wanting to leave the estate, go off and make her own life. Some said she ran off with a man, but I never believed it. No, I think something happened to her. Something bad. Why do you think that? Hastings asked, leaning forward. The innkeeper hesitated, looking around as if ensuring no one else was within earshot. There were rumours. People said she was seen arguing with someone at the estate the night she vanished. But no one ever got to the bottom of it. And then, nothing. She was gone, vanished. Just like that. A shiver ran down my spine. The innkeeper's words carried weight. Lillian Parsons had not simply disappeared. Something had happened to her, something that had been kept quiet. The connection to the skeleton buried in the graveyard seemed clearer now, yet the more I learned, the more questions arose. I turned to Hastings, my mind already racing through the possibilities. There is more to this story than we have been told. Lord Whitcomb, the villagers, the innkeeper, all of them are hiding pieces of the puzzle. It is clear that Lillian's disappearance is connected to the murder we are investigating. Hastings looked at me, a frown on his face. Do you think the skeleton is hers? It is a possibility, I replied, my voice steady. But we must tread carefully. There are many who would prefer these secrets to remain buried. We left the inn, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. The pieces of the mystery were slowly falling into place, but they were not yet clear. There was much more to uncover, and much more danger ahead. As we walked down the street, I paused, turning to Hastings with a sense of growing urgency. Hastings, we must speak to the vicar. He may know something about the events surrounding Lillian's disappearance. I have a strong feeling that the truth lies with him. Hastings nodded, his expression grave. Poirot, I think you're right. But be careful. The deeper we dig, the more dangerous this will become. I nodded in agreement, my mind already set on the next step of our investigation. The mystery of Lillian Parsons was far from over, and it seemed that the truth, when we uncovered it, would be more shocking than we could have imagined. Chapter 5. A Red Herring in the Estate Library. The day had turned colder, the sky above a drab grey, as if the weather itself had taken on the heaviness of the mystery that gripped the village of Westley. As Hastings and I made our way back to Whitcomb Manor, the sense of urgency had only grown. There were too many pieces of the puzzle left unexplained, too many unanswered questions that were pushing us toward a revelation I could not yet fathom. Lord Whitcomb's initial reaction to Lillian Parsons's name had been telling, but the more I reflected on our conversation, the more it struck me that his words had been a calculated evasion rather than an outright denial. Someone was hiding something, and the truth was being carefully obscured. We must inspect the family records, Hastings, I said, as we approached the imposing doors of Whitcomb Manor. The answer lies within them. I am certain of it. Hastings, ever the diligent companion, nodded but said nothing. Knowing that I would not be dissuaded from my course, the grand estate loomed before us, its ancient stones worn by time but still standing firm, like an unwilling witness to whatever had transpired behind its walls. Lord Whitcomb was waiting for us in his study, the air inside just as sterile and controlled as before. The same cold politeness marked his every gesture as he gestured for us to sit. "You've returned," he said, his voice neutral, his hands folded neatly on his desk. "I trust you're satisfied with your inquiries so far?" "I am satisfied but not content," I replied, my tone flat but firm. "There are some records I must examine, Lord Whitcomb. It is imperative we uncover the details of your estate's history. The missing pieces are likely hidden there." His expression, E.T., faltered for the briefest moment, but it was enough. I had seen it, something akin to fear, quickly masked by an arrogant poise. "Records," he repeated as though the word itself offended him. "I hardly think they're necessary at this stage. My family has nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. As I have said before, Lillian Parsons was merely a maid who left of her own accord. There is no need for further inspection." His deflection did not sway me. "I must insist, Lord Whitcomb," I pressed, "for the sake of clarity and closure. I only wish to understand the complete history of this estate, especially the year in which your servant, Miss Parsons, vanished. The truth will be found in the details, as always." He sat back in his chair, a flash of frustration in his eyes before he masked it with a practiced smile. "Very well," he said with a sigh, as if reluctantly yielding to my request. "You may access the records, but I will not tolerate any further suggestions that my family has been involved in anything untoward." With a polite nod, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I understand completely, Lord Whitcomb. I only wish to uncover the truth." A short while later, we were escorted to the estate's library, an expansive room filled with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. It was a testament to the family's legacy, a space that had witnessed centuries of Whitcomb history. The air was thick with the scent of old leather-bound books and the weight of untold stories. A quiet, persistent hum of age seemed to radiate from every corner. The librarian, an elderly man with a stiff gait and thinning hair, presented the records with an air of reluctance. His thin, bony fingers trembled slightly as he handed over the first ledger. I could feel his unease as he watched me closely, but I paid him no mind. My focus was entirely on the task at hand. The records were as I expected, meticulous, orderly, and vast. I began flipping through them, noting the names of various servants who had worked at the manor over the years, carefully marking each relevant detail. But it was as I reached the section from 10 years ago that a peculiar detail caught my eye. A ledger from the year Lillian disappeared was missing. My fingers hovered over the page where the records should have been, but the space was conspicuously empty, the page torn clean from the book. The absence was deliberate, not accidental. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal that particular entry. I straightened up, my eyes narrowing as the implications settled into my mind. This was no ordinary oversight. The ledger had been removed with precision, its absence an attempt to erase whatever might have been recorded about Lillian Parsons during that crucial time. My instinct told me that the answer I was seeking was hidden within that very missing record. "Do you see Hastings?" I murmured, my voice low but full of meaning. "Someone has gone to great lengths to obscure the past. Lillian Parsons's disappearance was no accident, and the family knows more than they have let on." Hastings, who had been patiently observing the proceedings, leaned closer, inspecting the page I had been studying. "It seems so, Poirot, but who could have done it? Surely Whitcomb himself isn't the only one involved in such a thing." "No," I replied, considering the question carefully. "There is more than one person who may have had a reason to erase this information. But I do not believe Lord Whitcomb is the only one at fault. I think someone close to him has been involved, perhaps even a member of the household staff. We continued our search through the records, but nothing else stood out. And the missing ledger continued to nag at the back of my mind. There was one other avenue I could pursue, a visit to the local constable. After all, someone must have filed a report when Lillian vanished, and those records, if they existed, could reveal the truth. But first, I needed to return to the estate. As I rose from the desk, a sense of unease settled over me. The pieces were beginning to fit together in ways that suggested a deliberate conspiracy to hide the truth. Yet, there was something still elusive about it. The truth lay somewhere between the missing ledger, the whispers of the villagers, and the dark secrets of Whitcomb Manor itself. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice measured. "You seem troubled. What are you thinking?" "I think, Hastings," I said, pausing to gather my thoughts, "that there is a great deal more to Lillian Parsons' disappearance than mere chance. Someone has gone to great lengths to conceal the facts, and whoever that is will stop at nothing to keep them hidden. The missing ledger is but one piece of the puzzle, and I am certain it is the key." As we made our way toward the exit, the librarian's nervous gaze followed us, his body language betraying a sense of unease. I felt his eyes upon us, as though he feared we might uncover something he was not ready to face. But I was resolute. The truth would be found, and I would not stop until it was laid bare. Once outside, I paused for a moment, looking at the grand estate before me. Whitcomb Manor, for all its outward elegance, was a place of secrets, secrets that I was determined to unearth. "I think it is time, Hastings," I said quietly, my mind already working through the next steps. "We need to speak with the constable and see what records they have on Lillian's disappearance. The truth is hidden, yes, but it is not beyond reach, and so we set off once more, knowing that each step brought us closer to the resolution we sought. But I had no doubt the game was far from over, and the answers I sought would not come easily. Chapter 6. The Widow's Gossip and a Startling Confession. The evening had drawn in, casting long shadows across the village of Westley. The heavy, almost oppressive stillness that had settled over the manor and its grounds now clung to the entire village. The disappearance of Lillian Parsons had become more than just an unfortunate incident. It had become a web of lies, secrets, and half-formed truths. Each revelation seemed to spin the tale in a new direction, but it was not yet clear which thread would lead us to the heart of the matter. Hastings and I had spent most of the afternoon combing through local records, seeking any sign that might point to where Lillian had gone or why she had vanished. Yet nothing had come to light. The constable's records were no more revealing than those of the estate. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could help us explain the mystery of her disappearance, save for one tiny whisper, a morsel of gossip from an unlikely source. Mrs. Frobisher, the village widow, had always been a woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper memory. She knew the comings and goings of everyone in Westley, and more often than not, her information was considered gospel. She had, in recent days, become a rather reluctant figure in our investigation, having offered little more than idle chatter. But today her eyes gleamed with a knowingness that sent a shiver down my spine. As we sat in her modest cottage, the wind howling outside, Mrs. Frobisher leaned forward, her bony hands clasped tightly together. "You're looking for answers, Mr. Poirot, aren't you?" Her voice was raspy, the words deliberate. "Well, let me tell you something I know for certain, something that no one else will." I nodded, my curiosity piqued. "Please, Mrs. Frobisher, Tell me what you know." Her eyes darted around the room as if making sure no one else could overhear, though there was no one else present. "Lillian had herself a man, Mr. Poirot, a man of status. He wasn't some common fellow. No, he was someone with power, someone who could give her things, who could promise her a life beyond the likes of a maid." My ears pricked at the words. This was new, important. "You are certain of this?" "I know it for a fact," she continued, her voice lowering. I overheard them speaking once, the two of them. She was angry, I remember, and he was trying to calm her down, telling her everything would be fine. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. The way he spoke, the way he treated her, it was as if she was nothing more than a possession to him. I leaned forward, absorbing her words. "Do you recall this man's name? Did she ever say who he was?" Mrs. Frobisher shook her head slowly, a sad, knowing smile on her lips. "I never heard him say it, but I know enough. He was a man of the manor, Lord Whitcomb's brother, Edward." The name struck me with an almost audible thud. Edward Whitcomb. The younger brother, a man whose presence at the manor I had barely acknowledged until now. The rumours of a mysterious relationship between him and Lillian Parsons were certainly not new, but they had never been confirmed. If this was true, if he had been the one who had been involved with Lillian, it would open up an entirely new line of inquiry. "Do you think he loved her?" I asked softly, my mind racing with possibilities. "Love?" Mrs. Frobisher scoffed. "No, not love. It was something else entirely. He was a man who had everything, status, wealth, power. But with Lillian, he wanted to control her, keep her for himself, but not in a way that made her feel free. That's how it is with men like him. She may have loved him, but he was no good for her." I nodded, considering the implications of what she had just shared. The affair, if true, would have been an explosive matter, especially for a family as proud as the Whitcombs. It was clear that Lord Whitcomb's brother had far more to answer for than anyone had realized. But the question remained. Had he killed Lillian? Or was there something else at play? Before I could probe further, the door to Mrs. Frobisher's cottage creaked open, and the figure of a man entered. It was none other than Edward Whitcomb, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "Poirot," he said, his voice shaking. "I must speak with you. It's urgent." Hastings and I exchanged a quick glance, both of us immediately on guard. There was no mistaking the anxiety that radiated from the younger Whitcomb. He was a man who had come to terms with a long-buried secret, and now it seemed he could no longer keep it from the world. "Edward Whitcomb," I said, standing to greet him. "What brings you here today?" I have to confess something," he began, his voice trembling. "It's about Lillian Parsons. I loved her. I still do. And I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I must tell you the truth. I didn't kill her, Poirot. I swear to you I didn't. But I know something." I motioned for him to sit, my curiosity piqued. "Go on, Edward. Tell me everything." He took a deep breath before continuing. Lillian was going to leave. She had decided to run away. She was going to leave the manor and start a new life somewhere far away. I tried to convince her to stay, but she wouldn't listen. And then, the next morning, she was gone. Disappeared without a trace. I didn't know what to think. But I loved her, Poirot. I truly did. I would never have harmed her. I studied him carefully, noting the desperation in his eyes. "But you were involved with her, yes? You were the man she confided in?" Edward's eyes widened, and he nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Yes, I was, but you must understand, she meant more to me than anything. I would never have hurt her. I just wanted her to be happy. If she had wanted to leave, I would have done anything to make that happen. I would have helped her." "And yet she disappeared," I said, quietly, letting the silence stretch out between us. "You claim that you loved her, but your story doesn't add up, Edward. If you truly loved her, why did she feel the need to run away in secret?" His gaze faltered, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know what happened to her after she left. I wish I could tell you more, but I don't remember." I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. "Edward, I do not believe you. I do not think you are telling me the whole truth. There is something you are hiding, something more than just your love for Lillian." He opened his mouth to protest, but the words never came. He could not meet my gaze, and his lips trembled as if he were fighting to say something he feared. Before I could press him further, Mrs. Frobisher spoke up, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "Edward, you don't have to hide anymore. It's time. Everyone in this village knows what happened to her. Don't you see? It's too late to keep lying." The words hung in the air, their implications hanging heavily over the room. He stood, his face drained of all colour. The truth, it seemed, was finally beginning to surface. I turned to Hastings, my mind already working through the tangled mess of this case. "Hastings," I said softly, "I believe we are on the cusp of uncovering the truth. But this confession, it is only the beginning. There is more to this story, and we must dig deeper." And so we would. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but, as always, the final revelation was still a mystery, tantalizingly out of reach. One thing was certain, however, the truth would be uncovered no matter the cost. Chapter 7. The Butler's Alibi and the Late-Night Visitor. The wind had grown colder, its biting touch sweeping through the village as night descended. There was a sense of urgency now, a pressure building with every hour that passed. The confession of Edward Whitcomb had not offered the clarity I had hoped for. Rather, it had only served to complicate matters further. The truth remained elusive, slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. I sat in the drawing-room of Whitcomb Manor, my fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wood of the desk before me. Hastings had retired to his quarters, leaving me to process the information we had gathered. It was not often that Poirot found himself at a crossroads in a case, but this time the lines between truth and deception were so carefully blurred that even my little grey cells were struggling to find their way. The mention of Edward's love for Lillian was significant, but his behaviour, his frantic insistence that he had not harmed her, suggested a deeper fear that had yet to reveal itself. Perhaps the younger Whitcomb was not the only one hiding something. Perhaps the entire family had secrets they were desperate to keep buried. Just as I was about to lose myself in thought, the door creaked open, and the familiar figure of Graves, the elderly butler, appeared in the threshold. He had aged considerably over the years, his thin white hair a testament to time's unyielding passage. But there was a sharpness in his eyes that spoke of a mind that had not dulled with age. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I must speak with you. There is something I have not yet told you, something I believe is important." I motioned for him to come closer. "Of course, Graves. You have information, I presume?" He nodded, glancing around the room before lowering his voice. "It concerns the crypt, The night before the exhumation of Miss Parsons' body, I saw something unusual. Someone was sneaking into the Whitcomb crypt. I raised an eyebrow, leaning forward in my chair. Someone? Are you certain of this? Graves's eyes flickered briefly to the door, as though checking that no one else could overhear. I am certain. I was in the hall just after midnight when I saw a shadowy figure slip past the windows. They were wearing dark clothes and they moved quickly. I didn't think much of it at first, but the next morning, when I heard about the exhumation, it struck me it might have been connected. I felt a chill creep down my spine. This was not an idle claim. Graves had seen something he believed was of significance, and I could not dismiss it so easily. The crypt had become a focal point of the investigation, the place where the truth could be buried or unearthed. But why would anyone want to tamper with the evidence, particularly the body of a woman who had disappeared under such mysterious circumstances? You are certain it was someone entering the crypt? I pressed, my voice steady, but my mind racing. Not a mistake, perhaps? A trick of the light? Graves shook his head. No, Monsieur Poirot, I know what I saw. It wasn't just a trick of the light. The figure moved deliberately as though they knew exactly where they were going. It was unsettling. This information altered the very nature of the case. If someone had indeed entered the crypt before the exhumation, they had done so with intent. But whose interest lay in disturbing Lillian's final resting place? And why? I see, I said thoughtfully. And did you notice anything else? Any other details that might be of use? Graves hesitated, then nodded slowly. There was something peculiar about the way the person moved. They seemed to be avoiding the main entrance. They didn't use the front steps, but went around the side of the crypt towards the back. And when they left, they did so in the same manner. They were in and out quickly. This new information raised more questions than it answered. If the person had entered through the back of the crypt, it suggested they had knowledge of the building's layout, something not easily known unless they were familiar with it. Was it someone with inside knowledge, or was there another, more sinister explanation? I understand, I said, standing up to pace the room. This is very helpful, Graves. It shifts the timeline significantly. If the figure you saw had been attempting to tamper with the evidence, it suggests that someone was actively working to cover up something important. Could it have been Lord Whitcomb? Graves asked quietly, as if the question had been gnawing at him. After all, his brother confessed his feelings for Lillian. Perhaps he didn't want any of this to come to light. I stopped, pacing, my mind racing. Graves's suggestion was not without merit. Lord Whitcomb had been a prominent figure in this entire affair, and yet his involvement had remained somewhat elusive. He had always appeared calm, even distant, but had his composure been the result of guilt? Or was he merely trying to protect his family's reputation? I do not yet know, I replied, my voice measured. But we must consider all possibilities. The figure in the crypt could have been anyone. Lord Whitcomb, yes, or perhaps someone else entirely. What matters now is that we follow the thread. The thought of Lord Whitcomb entering the crypt under cover of darkness seemed plausible, but I was not yet convinced. There was something too neat about it, too easily tied up. The case, I felt, was not as simple as a single perpetrator acting alone. There were deeper currents at play, and I needed more evidence before I could make a definitive judgment. I turned back to Graves, my expression firm. Graves, I will need you to tell me everything you know about the crypt, every detail. Do not omit anything, no matter how trivial it may seem. Graves nodded solemnly. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I will help in any way I can. As he left the room, I stood still for a moment, allowing the weight of the situation to settle over me. The case was now shifting before my eyes, the puzzle pieces scattered further apart, yet the picture was becoming clearer. Someone had tampered with the crypt, and whoever they were hiding something vital, something that could unravel everything. I turned to Hastings, who had been observing quietly from the corner of the room. "Hastings," I said, my voice quiet but resolute, "I believe we have uncovered something important. The crypt, its contents, hold the key to unlocking the mystery of Lillian's disappearance. Someone does not want the truth to surface, and it is our task to ensure that it does." Hastings nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm sure the answers will come soon, Poirot. But how much longer can this charade continue?" I smiled, though it was tinged with a hint of something darker. "Ah, mon ami, this charade will end soon enough. Every lie, every secret will be brought to light. But for now we must wait. The next step in our investigation will come, whether they are ready or not." As I turned to leave the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that the pieces of this puzzle were almost within reach. Just one final push was all that was needed. Chapter 8. The Doctor's Inconsistencies. The morning after my conversation with Graves, the air was thick with the promise of revelation. As I made my way back to the Whitcomb estate, my mind was busy sifting through the pieces of the puzzle that had accumulated thus far. Each conversation, each clue, seemed to cast more doubt upon the seemingly straightforward conclusion I had once entertained. Nothing about Lillian Parsons's death or her disappearance was as it appeared. It was as though a great and intricate web had been woven, each strand pulling in unexpected directions. It was early, and the estate was still quiet when I entered the study. Hastings was already there, reviewing some documents he had gathered overnight, but my thoughts were elsewhere. The crypt, Graves' mysterious figure, the confession of Edward Whitcomb. None of these had provided the clarity I was seeking. No, the answer, I felt, lay in the autopsy. There were pieces there, carefully buried beneath layers of professional calm that would eventually give way to the truth. I summoned Dr. Harper, the village physician, to the estate. His role in this affair had been pivotal. It was he who had conducted the autopsy on Lillian's body, and while his findings were important, there was something in his manner that made me cautious. Perhaps it was the too perfect nature of his report, as though he were trying a little too hard to convince everyone of its accuracy. Dr. Harper arrived promptly, his tall frame filling the doorway of the study. He was a man of solid reputation, known throughout the village as both a capable doctor and a man of honor, but as I had learned many times in my career, appearances could be deceiving. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted me, his expression serious. "You wanted to speak with me?" "Oui, Dr. Harper," I replied, motioning for him to sit. "There are details about your autopsy that I wish to revisit. Small things, you understand, but they could be of great importance." He settled into the chair across from me, looking slightly uneasy. "Of course, anything to assist in your investigation." I studied him for a moment, noting the faintest tremor in his hands. A man who had spent decades as a medical professional, a man who was accustomed to dealing with the dead, should not have such visible nerves. But there it was, the first clue that not everything about Dr. Harper was as it seemed. "I've been reviewing your report and something caught my attention," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You initially stated that the skeleton you discovered was approximately 10 years old. Yet later, when speaking to others, you suggested it could be as much as 15 years old. A subtle difference, perhaps, but one that cannot be dismissed so easily." His eyes widened briefly, and then he quickly recovered, offering a small smile. "Ah, yes, I recall that, Monsieur Poirot. A simple mistake, I assure you. The initial examination was brief, and I didn't have the time to properly assess the age of the remains." I must have misspoken. But you are certain of your findings now? I pressed, my gaze never leaving his face. Dr. Harper hesitated for just a moment before nodding. Yes, of course. After a more thorough examination, I can confirm that the remains are indeed about 15 years old. I apologize for any confusion. I let the silence hang for a beat, studying his expression. 15 years. And yet, Miss Parsons disappeared only 10 years ago, yes? A most curious discrepancy. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As I said, Monsieur Poirot, it was simply a mistake. Nothing more. It's easy to misjudge the age of bones, especially after such a long time, I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Indeed, bones, so often the silent witnesses to the passage of time, can tell many stories if one knows how to read them. And yet, Dr. Harper, you yourself have stated that these remains could belong to someone who disappeared only 10 years ago. That raises the question, does it not? How could someone who vanished only 10 years ago be buried in a crypt for so much longer than that? His mouth tightened, and for a brief moment I saw the mask slip. In that instant I knew that his previous slip of the tongue had not been accidental. There was something more to his story, something he was desperately trying to hide. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice more strained now. I've been in this profession for many years. My judgment is sound. I do not question your judgment, Dr. Harper, I replied gently. But I must question your reasoning. You see, it is not the first time I have encountered inconsistencies in reports, particularly in cases where someone wishes to divert attention away from certain facts. Dr. Harper stared at me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering, as though weighing whether he should continue this charade or abandon it entirely. Finally, with a deep sigh, he placed his hands on the arms of his chair and spoke, his tone heavier now. You are right, Poirot, he said, his voice lowering. There is more to this than meets the eye. But I had no choice but to give the report as I did. Ah, I said, leaning in closer. And why is that, I wonder? He looked away, his gaze falling to the floor. Because I was asked to? Lord Whitcomb, he insisted that I not reveal the true age of the remains. I was not surprised. Lord Whitcomb's involvement in this affair was becoming increasingly suspect, and I had no doubt that his influence had been felt in many corners of this investigation. Asked, you say? Or perhaps coerced? Dr. Harper's expression faltered. I did what I had to do to maintain the peace in the village. Lord Whitcomb is a man of power, and he has his ways. He threatened to ruin my career if I didn't comply. There it was, the thread I had been waiting for. Lord Whitcomb's influence was not just confined to the manor and the land. It extended into every corner of the village, even the most trusted of its professionals. And you chose to comply? I asked softly, though the accusation was clear. Why? He swallowed hard, his throat working as if to dislodge a bitter truth. What else could I do? My reputation was at stake, my career, my livelihood. I am not a young man, Poirot. I couldn't afford to lose everything. I nodded slowly, understanding the pressure under which he had acted. And so you falsified the findings? You helped to bury the truth? I didn't want to, but I felt I had no choice, he whispered, his voice almost inaudible now. But now that the truth is coming to light, I can't keep hiding it. You must know, Poirot, that I had no part in her death. I simply did as I was told. I stood, walking slowly towards the window, my mind racing. There was no question now. Dr. Harper's lie had been deliberate, but why? And what had Lord Whitcomb hoped to achieve by hiding the true age of the bones? It was a question that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, demanding an answer. "What of the crypt, Dr. Harper?" I asked, my voice firm. "Do you know of any reason why someone might have tampered with the remains before the exhumation?" He shook his head, his eyes filled with confusion. "I cannot say. I've told you everything I know." I turned back to face him. "You've done well to come forward, Dr. Harper. But your involvement in this matter is far from over." And with that, I dismissed him, the weight of his confession settling in my mind like a stone in the pit of my stomach. The timeline of Lillian's disappearance was shifting, and with it, my understanding of the events that had led to her death. I walked back to the study, the pieces of the puzzle coming together, but not yet in a way that made sense. The inconsistencies in Dr. Harper's testimony were clear now, but they only deepened the mystery. What was Lord Whitcomb hiding? What was so important about the age of the remains that it had to be concealed? I did not have the answers yet, but I would soon. Chapter 9. The Cryptic Letter and the Hidden Key. The sun had dipped low over the Whitcomb estate by the time I returned to the manor that evening. The weight of the day's revelations pressed heavily on my mind, each discovery adding more complexity to a case that seemed to grow ever more tangled with each passing hour. Dr. Harper's confession had been enlightening, yet it had raised far more questions than it had answered. Lord Whitcomb's influence, his willingness to manipulate even the truth of a woman's death, was deeply troubling. But it was a thread I could not yet pull at without risking the unravelling of everything. I had just settled into the library when I noticed the faintest trace of smoke in the air, the remnants of something that had been recently burned. The fireplace in the corner had a charred log still smouldering, and the ashes around it bore the unmistakable signs of something more than mere wood. I approached cautiously, as one might approach a patient who might flinch at the slightest movement. There, buried beneath a pile of used firewood, was a piece of paper, its edges singed and curled by the flames. At first glance, it seemed nothing more than the remains of an old letter, discarded, forgotten, but I could feel the pull of something deeper, something that whispered of secrets yet to be uncovered. I took the letter, carefully unfolding its blackened edges as I stood by the fire. The text was faint, the ink running in places, but the words were legible enough. It was a personal letter, addressed not to anyone in particular, but written in a tone that suggested an intimate conversation, one that had not been meant for the public eye. The words were stilted, uncomfortable, as though the author were confessing something they had long buried. As I read, I could feel the weight of the guilt that had prompted this letter. I fear that all of this will come to light. The child, the shame, the consequences. I never thought I would be forced to confront it again. But it seems my past has a way of resurfacing. I beg of you, do not let it be known. If you must, tell them that it was an accident, but no one can ever know the truth. Please, I implore you, do not reveal what I have done. The letter ended there, abruptly, with no signature. The writer's identity remained a mystery, but the contents were chilling. An illegitimate child, a secret kept hidden for years. Such revelations could tear apart the carefully constructed facade of respectability that surrounded the Whitcomb family. But there was more to this letter than mere confession. Beneath the remains of the scorched paper, I discovered something even more curious. A small, rusted key. It was plain, unremarkable, except for the faint engraving on its surface, just enough to make one pause. HC was etched into the metal, its meaning unclear. I turned it over in my hand, examining it closely. It was old, likely just as old as the letter itself. Yet its presence here, amid the ashes of the fireplace, suggested it had been deliberately hidden. But hidden from whom? And for what purpose? I glanced around the room, the weight of this new clue settling in my mind. Why had someone gone to the trouble of destroying the letter? And why had they kept this key, this symbol, hidden from view for so long? My instincts told me that this was not a mere trinket, but a vital part of the puzzle. The key had a purpose, and it was linked to the secret revealed in the letter. I turned back to the letter, rereading the words again, as if the meaning might suddenly reveal itself in some new light. A child hidden away, the shame of the Whitcomb family bound in silence. It was a story I had heard before, in countless variations. Family secrets kept buried, desperate attempts to protect one's name at all costs. But the key changed everything. It was a key to something, a room, a chest, a vault, something that could hold the answers I sought. The night deepened as I sat there, turning the key over in my hands, my thoughts racing. I knew I had to find the lock it opened, but where? I couldn't afford to waste time, not with the evidence already slipping through my fingers. There was no turning back now. The following morning, I summoned Hastings to join me in my search. He arrived promptly, as always, his brow furrowed in anticipation. I wasted no time in revealing the letter and the key. His face was unreadable, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. "Another clue, Poirot?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "It seems that we are no closer to the heart of this mystery than we were before." "No, Hastings," I replied, my voice low. "We are closer. The key will lead us to the truth, but we must be careful. Lord Whitcomb, his influence, it is far-reaching, and I believe he will stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried." We spent the next several hours scouring the manor, searching for any place that might conceal the lock that corresponded to the key. The obvious choice was the library, where the letter had been hidden, but that had been thoroughly examined already. The vaults in the cellar were locked tight, and there was no sign of any hidden compartments. As the hours wore on, I began to feel the gnawing frustration of a mystery that refused to give up its secrets. And then, just as the sun began to set, Hastings made a discovery. It was a small door tucked away behind a large bookcase at the far end of the hallway. The door was unassuming, almost invisible against the dark wood panelling, and it was locked. But as I approached, I could see the unmistakable impression of the keyhole, a perfect match for the key I had found in the fireplace. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low. "I think we found it." I nodded, my mind already racing. Ahead, we had been looking in the wrong places, focusing on the obvious. The secret lay not in the vault or the rooms the family used, but in something far more hidden, a place no one would think to look. I slid the key into the lock, feeling the resistance give way as the mechanism clicked open. The door creaked, on its hinges, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into the darkness below. The air was thick with dust, the faint scent of decay lingering in the shadows. With no hesitation, I stepped forward, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Hastings followed close behind, the tension between us palpable. What lay at the end of this staircase? What secrets would we uncover in the hidden recesses of Whitcomb Manor? As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the faintest glimmer of light ahead, a glow that seemed too unnatural. too deliberate. I motioned for Hastings to remain silent as I advanced, my heart pounding in anticipation. At the far end of the narrow passageway, I saw what I had been searching for. A large, wooden chest, its surface worn and aged, covered in dust, but otherwise undisturbed. It was here that the key belonged, and as I reached for the latch, I felt a sense of inevitability wash over me. The secrets of the Whitcomb family, of Lillian Parsons, of the past, all of it was about to come to light. I lifted the lid slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Inside the chest, wrapped in layers of cloth, was something that made my blood run cold. Chapter 10. The Blackmail Plot and the Vanishing Ledger. As I gazed down into the chest, my hand still hovering over its lid, the weight of anticipation hung heavily in the air. There was no turning back now. The secrecy of the Whitcomb family, the threads I had pulled at for days, had led me here, to this moment, to this discovery. I lifted the cloth carefully, its fabric dusty with years of neglect, and exposed the contents. Inside, there was a leather-bound ledger, its pages worn and stained with age. It was not the same ledger that had gone missing some days prior, but it bore a striking resemblance to it, just as meticulously kept, just as carefully written. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of its significance. This was no ordinary book. This was the key to unlocking the Whitcomb family's darkest secrets. Poirot? Hastings' voice broke through the silence, low and hesitant. He had been standing at the edge of the narrow passageway, watching intently, but unsure of what to do next. I could see the question in his eyes. What had we uncovered? What did it mean? Mon ami, I said softly, my eyes still fixed on the ledger. This is it. This is what we have been searching for. With a steady hand, I opened the ledger. The pages were filled with the precise, almost clinical handwriting that had become so familiar to me. Names, dates, amounts, nothing unusual at first glance. Yet, as I flicked through the pages, I noticed something curious. The entries became erratic, as though the author had begun to lose control of their thoughts. And then I found it. A gap. A page was missing, the paper torn cleanly from the spine. The hole was too neat, too deliberate. Whoever had removed it knew exactly what they were doing. The absence of that one page filled me with a sense of foreboding, as though it held the key to something far more sinister than any of the previous clues. I could hear Hastings approach, his footsteps slow and cautious as he peered over my shoulder. "What is it, Poirot?" he asked again, his voice tinged with impatience. I closed the ledger with a soft snap, my mind racing. The missing page was not a coincidence, it was a deliberate act. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal something, and it was no doubt connected to the blackmail plot I had been suspecting all along. You see, Hastings, I began, my voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. Lord Whitcomb has been hiding more than just family secrets. There is a plot here, something far darker. It seems someone has been blackmailing him, using his past as leverage, and I believe it all ties back to Lillian Parsons. Hastings blinked in confusion. Blackmail? But what would someone have to gain from such a thing? Lord Whitcomb is wealthy, yes, but there has to be more to it than that. Nodded slowly, feeling the pieces of the puzzle coming together. Exactly. It isn't just about money, Hastings. It never is with matters like this. It's about power, about control. And someone knew exactly how to exploit Lord Whitcomb's weaknesses. I began to walk slowly around the dimly lit chamber, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the stone walls. My mind was churning with the implications. The missing page, the secret letter, the half-burned documents in the fireplace, all these fragments were slowly converging, pointing towards a single truth. Lord Whitcomb was not the innocent victim he appeared to be. He had been involved in something far more treacherous, something that, once exposed, would ruin him completely. "It's clear now," I continued. "Lord Whitcomb's past is the weapon someone has used against him. The question is, who? Who had the means to exploit such a secret?" As if on cue, the door to the passageway creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. It was Graves, the butler, his face pale and drawn. His usual composure had vanished, replaced by an unsettling nervousness. I knew at once that something had changed. Graves had always been a man of few words, but now there was a tremor in his voice that betrayed his calm exterior. "Poirot," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I believe I've found something. Something that may help." I turned toward him, my curiosity piqued. "What have you found, Graves?" The butler stepped forward, holding something in his hands, a small, crumpled envelope. His fingers were trembling as he handed it to me. I took it from him carefully, noting the seal on the back. It was not a family seal, not one I recognized, but something about it seemed familiar. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was sharp, bold, its message unmistakable. "I know what you did, Whitcomb. If you don't want the world to find out, you will pay the price. There's no escaping it now. Meet me at midnight at the old mill. Come alone, or the consequences will be dire." I held the letter in my hands, my mind racing. The blackmail was real, and it was escalating. The mention of the old mill, a place long abandoned, could not have been more ominous. Someone was preparing to take action, and the stakes were growing higher by the minute. Hastings stepped forward, his brow furrowed. This letter, who sent it? And why now? "That is the question we must answer," I said, my voice steady but laced with urgency. "This is no idle threat. Whoever sent this letter knows something, and they mean to use it to their advantage." Graves remained standing in the doorway, his face a mixture of fear and concern. "Poirot, there's something else," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "There's been a change in the household. People are nervous. I overheard Lord Whitcomb and his solicitor speaking last night. There were mentions of a ledger, one that was missing. I don't know what it means, but it sounded important." A missing ledger. The same ledger I had just discovered. The connection was too clear to ignore. Someone had been deliberately trying to erase evidence, to erase traces of the past that could expose them. But now, it seemed, the blackmail had gone beyond mere threats. It had become a game, one that was about to escalate into something far more dangerous. I turned back to Graves, my eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Graves, who else knew about the ledger? Who else knew about the missing page?" The butler hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously. "I don't know, Poirot. But there are whispers, rumors among the staff. People talk when they think no one is listening. I heard mention of a woman, someone who could be involved in this whole affair." "A woman?" I echoed, my curiosity piqued. "Who?" "I can't say for certain, sir," Graves replied, shaking his head. "But I overheard the name Lillian more than once. I believe she was important to Lord Whitcomb in some way." Lillian. The name echoed in my mind, tying together all the disparate threads of this case. The missing page, the blackmail, the secret letter. It was all connected to her. But how? And who would go so far to destroy the evidence of her death, to silence the truth? I turned back to Hastings, my thoughts already moving ahead. We must go to the old mill tonight. There we will uncover the final piece of this puzzle. Hastings nodded, his face grim. And if someone is waiting for us? Then we shall be ready, I said, my voice resolute. The truth will not remain hidden for much longer. Chapter 11. A second murder. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale silver light over the village, its radiance muted by the dense clouds drifting aimlessly above. A heavy silence had fallen over the manor as Hastings and I prepared to leave. For the old mill. The cold night air hung around us like a shroud, the tension of the impending confrontation palpable. Then suddenly the silence was shattered. A scream, sharp, desperate, split the air. "Mon Dieu!" I exclaimed, my heart leaping in my chest. Without a moment's hesitation, I turned on my heel and rushed out of the study, with Hastings at my heels. We made our way through the darkened corridors and down the grand staircase in a hurry, barely taking the time to avoid the shadows that threatened to swallow us whole. The scream had come from outside the manor, a sound so chilling that it seemed to freeze the air itself. We burst through the front door into the courtyard, and the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the surroundings. The scream had sounded as though it had come from the direction of the village, yet it had been so sudden and full of terror that I could hardly be certain. "We must find its source," I said, already beginning to move toward the gates, but before I could take a step further, a second scream echoed, louder and more frantic than the first. It was unmistakable now. The scream was coming from the direction of the village doctor's office. Hastings was already beside me, his face taut with worry. "Poirot, what if... There is no time for hesitation, mon ami," I interrupted, quickening my pace. "We must go at once." The walk to the doctor's office, usually a short one, felt endless under the weight of the air pressing down on us. We passed the village's cobblestone streets, their silent houses like dark sentinels, unmoving and unaware of the danger that lurked within the shadows. As we approached the doctor's office, the tension became unbearable, as though something ominous was just around the corner, waiting to reveal itself. When we reached the door, it was ajar, and I felt my pulse quicken. I gestured for Hastings to stay back, then stepped forward cautiously, pushing the door open just enough to peer inside. The faint light of a single lamp flickered weakly through the doorway. I stepped into the room, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickle as I took in the scene before me. The doctor, Dr. Jameson, lay slumped across his desk, his body stiff and lifeless. His face was pale, his lips tinged with a bluish hue. A glass, shattered and empty, lay nearby, the faintest remnants of a viscous liquid still clinging to its rim. "Mon Dieu," I whispered, kneeling beside the doctor's body. I could already tell that the cause of death was poison. There were the telltale signs, the discoloration of the lips, the pooling of blood under the skin. But this was no simple case of a man dying from a common poison. No, this was deliberate, methodical. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that Dr. Jameson would not survive. Hastings stepped forward, his face pale but his demeanor steady. "Poirot, who would do such a thing? Why kill the doctor?" I stood slowly, my mind working at lightning speed as I considered the possibilities. Dr. Jameson was not just a doctor. He was a man who knew too much, Hastings, a man who had been too close to the truth for someone's comfort. He had access to the Whitcomb family's medical records, and he had been present at every step of this investigation. There are few who would have wanted him dead more than the one who stands to lose the most from the truth coming to light. Hastings blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "But who? Who would want him silenced?" I paused, my gaze shifting to the remnants of the shattered glass on the floor. My mind was already assembling the puzzle pieces. It all fit. The missing page from the ledger, the cryptic letter, the blackmail, and now this. Someone was getting desperate. Whoever had been pulling the strings had realized that Dr. Jameson was the key, and they had taken drastic measures to ensure that he would never speak again. "We must search the office thoroughly," I said, rising to my feet. "Look for anything out of place, anything that could point us to the killer." Hastings began to search the room, rifling through the doctor's papers and shelves with quiet efficiency. I turned my attention to the desk itself, noticing that some of the papers had been hastily shoved aside. It was as if someone had been looking for something the doctor had been hiding. I picked up a letter that had been discarded carelessly, the ink barely legible but still readable. The name at the top caught my eye. Lillian Parsons. It was a letter from the doctor to her, a private communication, one that appeared to be a warning. The letter read, "Lillian, I fear things are taking a dangerous turn. The evidence we have collected could destroy everything. If you want to save yourself, you must act quickly. I have kept a record, but I'm afraid there are others who may not be as interested in the truth. Proceed with caution. There are those who would do anything to keep this hidden. Jameson." I folded the letter carefully, my mind whirring with the implications. Dr. Jameson had been working with Lillian, trying to protect the truth, but the truth, it seemed, was dangerous. Far more dangerous than I had first imagined. Hastings joined, me at the desk, his face grim. "Poirot, what's going on here? First the blackmail and now this? Is it all connected?" "Indeed, mon ami," I said, my voice filled with quiet conviction. "The doctor's murder is not an isolated event. It is part of a larger pattern, one that involves not only the Whitcomb family, but also Lillian Parsons and perhaps even others we have not yet considered. Someone wanted to ensure that the doctor's knowledge remained buried." I turned to leave the office, my mind already spinning with theories. "We must return to the manor. There are still more pieces to uncover, more questions to answer. But one thing is certain, the killer is growing desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes." As we walked back toward the manor, the weight of the situation settled over me. Dr. Jameson's death had changed everything. It had brought the darkness to the forefront, and now, more than ever, I knew that the truth could not remain hidden for much longer. The final confrontation was approaching, but who would be left standing when the truth finally came to light? Chapter 12. The Widow's True Identity. The hours following Dr. Jameson's death were heavy with tension. The village had never known such violence, and the entire atmosphere felt thick with uncertainty. I returned to the manor, my mind filled with the pieces of the puzzle that were slowly coming together, albeit with alarming clarity. Hastings was uncharacteristically quiet beside me as we walked back through the dimly lit streets, both of us deeply immersed in the strange, twisting web we were caught in. The more I thought about Dr. Jameson's death, the more certain I became. The killer had been trying to keep something hidden, something that could shatter the fragile peace of the Whitcomb family and, perhaps, the entire village. The question was, what was it? And who had the most to lose from its revelation? We reached the manor just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. I could not help but notice the figure of Mrs. Frobisher standing by the window in the parlour, her silhouette faintly visible against the pale morning light. The widow, so mournful, so seemingly helpless, but I had learned by now to never trust appearances, for in every case there was more than met the eye. Hastings stepped forward, his face pale, but his demeanour steady. "Poirot, who would do such a thing? Why kill the doctor?" I stood slowly, my mind working at lightning speed as I considered the possibilities. Dr. Jameson was not just a doctor. He was a man who knew too much, Hastings, a man who had been too close to the truth for someone's comfort. He had access to the Whitcomb family's medical records, and he had been present at every step of this investigation. There are few who would have wanted him dead more than the one who stands to lose the most from the truth coming to light. Hastings blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. But who? Who would want him silenced? I paused, my gaze shifting to the remnants of the shattered glass on the floor. My mind was already assembling the puzzle pieces. It all fit. The missing page from the ledger, the cryptic letter, the blackmail, and now this. Someone was getting desperate. Whoever had been pulling the strings had realized that Dr. Jameson was the key, and they had taken drastic measures to ensure that he would never speak again. "We must search the office thoroughly," I said, rising to my feet. "Look for anything out of place, anything that could point us to the killer." Hastings began to search the room, rifling through the doctor's papers and shelves with quiet efficiency. I turned my attention to the desk itself, noticing that some of the papers had been hastily shoved aside. It was as if someone had been looking for something the doctor had been hiding. I picked up a letter that had been discarded carelessly, the ink barely legible but still readable. The name at the top caught my eye. Lillian Parsons. It was a letter from the doctor to her, a private communication, one that appeared to be a warning. The letter read, "Lillian, I fear things are taking a dangerous turn. The evidence we have collected could destroy everything. If you want to save yourself, you must act quickly. I have kept a record, but I'm afraid there are others who may not be as interested in the truth. Proceed with caution. There are those who would do anything to keep this hidden. Jameson." I folded the letter carefully, my mind whirring with the implications. Dr. Jameson had been working with Lillian, trying to protect the truth, but the truth, it seemed, was dangerous. Far more dangerous than I had first imagined. Hastings joined me at the desk, his face grim. "Poirot, what's going on here? First the blackmail and now this? Is it all connected?" "Indeed, mon ami," I said, my voice filled with quiet conviction. "The doctor's murder is not an isolated event. It is part of a larger pattern, one that involves not only the Whitcomb family, but also Lillian Parsons and perhaps even others we have not yet considered. Someone wanted to ensure that the doctor's knowledge remained buried." I turned to leave the office, my mind already spinning with theories. "We must return to the manor. There are still more pieces to uncover, more questions to answer. But one thing is certain, the killer is growing desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes." As we walked back toward the manor, the weight of the situation settled over me. Dr. Jameson's death had changed everything. It had brought the darkness to the forefront, and now, more than ever, I knew that the truth could not remain hidden for much longer. The final confrontation was approaching, but who would be left standing when the truth finally came to light? Chapter 12. The widow's true identity. The hours following Dr. Jameson's death were heavy with tension. The village had never known such violence, and the entire atmosphere felt thick with uncertainty. I returned to the manor, my mind filled with the pieces of the puzzle that was slowly coming together, albeit with alarming clarity. Hastings was uncharacteristically quiet beside me as we walked back through the dimly lit streets, both of us deeply immersed in the strange, twisting web we were caught in. The more I thought about Dr. Jameson's death, the more certain I became. The killer had been trying to keep something hidden, something that could shatter the fragile peace of the Whitcomb family and, perhaps, the entire village. The question was, what was it, and who had the most to lose from its revelation? We reached the manor just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. I could not help but notice the figure of Mrs. Frobisher standing by the window in the parlour, her silhouette faintly visible against the pale morning light. The widow, so mournful, so seemingly helpless. But I had learned by now to never trust appearances, for in every case there was more than met the eye. "So you fear you were getting too close to the truth?" I asked, my mind racing as the puzzle pieces continued to fall into place. "Is that why you've been so reluctant to speak openly about the past?" Mrs. Frobisher nodded, her eyes haunted now. "Yes. I have found things that would ruin everything if they came to light. I thought I could protect myself by staying hidden, but the more I searched, the more dangerous it became. I fear for my life now. Someone doesn't want me to uncover what happened to Lillian." I stood still, my mind running through the implications of this revelation. It was clear now. Mrs. Frobisher had been playing a dangerous game, and it was far from over. "I will help you," I said quietly, my gaze unwavering. "But you must trust me completely. We must find the truth, no matter what it costs." As I spoke those words, I could feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on us all, drawing us into a final confrontation. And somewhere in the depths of the shadows, I knew the killer was watching, waiting for their moment to strike. Chapter 13. Poirot's Trap and the Final Clue. The room was thick with tension. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the only sound punctuating the heavy silence as I stood before the gathered group in the Whitcomb drawing-room. It was a rather unusual setting for what I was about to do, but I had carefully constructed this moment with precision, as I always did. The pieces were finally beginning to fall into place, and it was time to reveal the truth. Hastings stood nearby, his ever-present inquisitive gaze following the proceedings. I had briefed him, of course, on my plan, though, as always, he was only partially aware of the exact methods I would employ. He had learned by now that my techniques were best left undisclosed until the final moment. Lord Whitcomb and Mrs. Frobisher, the widow, sat in tense silence, their faces betraying little emotion, but a distinct air of apprehension. They had not yet fully grasped the trap I had set, though I suspected that Mrs. Frobisher might have begun to suspect that I knew more than I had let on. Still, she remained composed, her calculated poise serving her well. It was not the first time I had encountered such a persona. The others, those involved in this tangled affair, stood around the room, watching closely, their expressions varying, between curiosity and unease. They had all been under suspicion at some point or another, and the tension in the room was palpable. Even the butler, Aldridge, was present, though I had not yet ruled him out entirely. There was something about his demeanour that did not quite sit right with me, but my focus, for the moment, was elsewhere. "I trust you are all aware of the events that have unfolded in the past few days," I began, my voice steady and calm, as I addressed the group. I allowed my gaze to linger on each of them, one by one. "A death, a mystery, and most importantly, a truth that remains hidden." I paused, allowing my words to sink in. "This investigation," I continued, "has not been without its twists. But as I stand here now, I believe I have uncovered the one mistake that cannot be overlooked, the mistake that only the murderer could have made. A murmur of nervous energy rippled through the room, and I watched as their faces betrayed a flicker of unease. They were all on edge, each of them knowing that the endgame had arrived. None more so than Mrs. Frobisher, whose hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white with tension. I turned my gaze upon her, allowing a small, knowing smile to tug at the corner of my lips. "Madame Frobisher," I said, my tone soft yet firm, "I believe it is time for you to confess." Her reaction was swift and dramatic. Her face drained of colour, and she stood up abruptly as if to retreat. But she stopped herself, steadying her breath. "What do you mean, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, though the tremor in her voice was unmistakable. "You made one mistake, madame," I said, my eyes never leaving hers. "A mistake that no one else could have made, save for you." A heavy silence followed, and in that silence I saw it, the flicker of recognition. Mrs. Frobisher's eyes shifted almost imperceptibly to the floor. She knew what I was referring to. "It was the letter," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. "The letter you found in Lord Whitcomb's study, the one addressed to Dr. Jameson." There was a collective intake of breath. As the gathered group took in my words, Mrs. Frobisher's face contorted ever so slightly, her earlier composure faltering. She took a step back, but her retreat was futile. She was cornered. "The letter," I continued, my gaze locked on her, "was found in the doctor's office, but there was something curious about it. The handwriting, it was in a rush, carelessly scrawled, as if the writer was trying to hide something." I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air before continuing. "But what gave it away, the crucial mistake, was the use of a particular word, a word that no one but you would have known, a word that indicated you had been in the doctor's office, and that you had known the exact contents of the letter before it was even discovered." The room fell into stunned silence as Mrs. Frobisher's face crumbled. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hand trembling as she grasped the edge of her chair. I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just trying to protect myself, protect my sister," the room gasped. "Lillian?" Of course, the name had been uttered more than once during this investigation, but now, it seemed, we were finally getting to the heart of the matter. "You see," Mrs. Frobisher continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I wasn't trying to kill anyone. I didn't plan it like this. But I knew Dr. Jameson. He had been investigating Lillian's disappearance. He was close to the truth, and he was going to expose it. He was going to expose me." Her eyes met mine now, her expression filled with desperation. "I was just trying to find her, Poirot. For years I searched for my sister. But when I found out that my husband had been involved, when I found out that he was the one who had been behind her disappearance, I couldn't let anyone else know." I could feel the weight of her words in the room, like a cloud that pressed down upon us all. She had been living in a world of lies for so long, but now everything was unraveling. The truth about Lillian's disappearance, her own involvement, and the depth of the Whitcomb family's secrets was too much for anyone to bear. "But what about Lord Whitcomb?" Hastings asked, his voice filled with confusion. "He was never mentioned until now." Mrs. Frobisher's expression darkened. "Lord Whitcomb, he wasn't just my husband. He was Lillian's father. He had been hiding her for years, keeping her locked away. He didn't want anyone to know what he had done, and when I began asking questions, when I started to uncover things that he had buried, well, he couldn't have that, could he? The revelation hit like a storm. Lord Whitcomb, the respected patriarch of the family, was not the innocent man everyone had believed him to be. He had been complicit in his daughter's disappearance, and the secrets he had hidden for so long had finally come to light. "Then it was you, madame," I said softly, my words sharp and final. "You killed Dr. Jameson to keep the truth from being exposed. You knew he was close to uncovering everything." She nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I never wanted it to go this far. But once I realized he knew, I had no choice. He would have destroyed everything." I stood for a moment in silence, taking in the weight of the confession. There was so much more to this story than anyone had realized. Mrs. Frobisher, the grieving widow, had been searching for her sister, trying to uncover a truth too horrifying to face, but in the end it had all led to murder. But as I stood there, the final piece of the puzzle still seemed just out of reach. Who had helped her? Who had been the true mastermind behind all of this? Chapter 14. The unmasking of the killer. The room had grown heavy with the weight of Mrs. Frobisher's confession, the air thick with the tension of truths long buried. The others stood in shocked silence, their faces contorting in disbelief as the enormity of the revelation sank in. But I could sense that there was something more, a final, crucial piece to the puzzle that had yet to be uncovered. Mrs. Frobisher, now trembling before me, had just admitted to her involvement in the doctor's death, driven by fear of her sister's secrets coming to light. Yet, as I stood there, watching her, I felt the lingering presence of something much darker behind the scenes, something that tied all the strings of this tragedy together. I turned my attention back to Lord Whitcomb, whose face had turned a pale shade of ashen grey. He had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, his eyes darting nervously between his wife, the other guests, and me. He had been far too quiet in all of this, an unsettling fact that I could not overlook. "You," I said, fixing my gaze on him. The words hung in the air like a damning accusation, and I watched as Lord Whitcomb flinched under my scrutiny. "Yes, you," I repeated. "You have been hiding far more than you've allowed anyone to see, Lord Whitcomb. Your wife's confession only scratches the surface of what truly happened." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes momentarily avoiding mine before he looked at Mrs. Frobisher, then back at me. A cold sweat was beading on his forehead, his lips pressed tightly together as though he were trying to hold something back. "I don't know what you mean," he finally managed, his voice far more strained than he likely intended. "You're lying," I said simply, stepping closer. "You know exactly what I mean. The truth is much darker than either you or your wife has allowed anyone to believe. And it is time for you to confess." Lord Whitcomb's expression hardened, a flash of panic quickly masking his face. But there was something in his eyes, something I had seen before in the faces of guilty men, that betrayed him. His reluctance to speak now was the surest sign that the truth was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us, letting the weight of the moment press down on him. The others in the room were watching intently, and I could feel their anticipation mounting. There was no turning back now. "I've already told you," Mrs. Frobisher said, her voice cracking. "I didn't kill the doctor, but I didn't know everything. I didn't know the full extent of what he had done." I turned to her, my gaze steady and deliberate. "No, madam. You knew enough. But you were too afraid to confront the heart of the matter. Lord Whitcomb, I said, my voice rising slightly, is not the innocent husband you once thought him to be. He is the one who should be held accountable for the death of your sister. A gasp rippled through the room, and Mrs. Frobisher's face twisted in confusion and disbelief. What are you saying? How could you? The truth is simple, madame, I replied, my tone cold. Lillian was not just your sister. She was carrying Lord Whitcomb's child. And to protect himself from scandal, he did the unthinkable. I turned back to Lord Whitcomb, whose expression had shifted from defensiveness to something resembling fear. He knew I was closing in on him, and he was aware that his time was running out. Lillian's pregnancy, I continued, was something Lord Whitcomb could not allow to be exposed. The child was an heir, a scandal waiting to unfold. It was far easier to eliminate the source of the problem than face the consequences of his actions. Lillian had become a threat. Lord Whitcomb's lips trembled, but he said nothing, his silence confirming my deductions. The doctor, I went on, was aware of the pregnancy, and he too became part of the cover-up. He helped hide the body, kept it a secret from the authorities. But, as often happens with such dark deeds, Dr. Jameson was left with no choice but to be silenced. He was murdered to ensure that the truth remained buried and the scandal remained.
Hidden? Mrs. Frobisher let out a choked cry, her hand flying to her mouth in shock.
Her husband's guilt was too much for her to bear, and she staggered back, her eyes wide with horror. Lord Whitcomb, now cornered and unable to deny it any longer, stood up abruptly. He looked to the door as though contemplating fleeing, but he knew it was no use. The truth was out and there was no escaping it now. Don't, I said firmly. Sit down, Lord Whitcomb. It is over. You can't run from your actions. You cannot outrun the truth. He hesitated, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the chair. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. You killed your daughter's sister, I said quietly. You killed her because of your own greed and fear. You couldn't afford to have your indiscretions exposed. His eyes flickered toward Mrs. Frobisher, and for a moment there was something close to regret in his gaze. But it was fleeting, and in the next instant his expression hardened once more. It's all lies. You don't understand. I understand everything, I interjected, cutting him off. The lie is that you thought you could get away with it. But now the truth is laid bare. The room was utterly still. No one spoke. Everyone simply watched, knowing that the conclusion was inevitable. Lord Whitcomb was no longer the dignified lord they had all thought him to be. He was a murderer, and his crimes had been exposed for all to see. I turned to the others, my voice unwavering. The doctor was an accomplice, yes, but it was Lord Whitcomb who orchestrated the entire affair. He killed his daughter's sister to hide his own sins, and in doing so, he condemned her to death. Whitcomb's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he appeared truly defeated. The weight of his actions had caught up with him. I didn't mean to kill her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But when she found out, when she threatened to go to the police, I couldn't let that happen. I took a step closer to him. And so you killed her and buried her in the family grave. You thought you could bury the truth along with her. Lord Whitcomb's head fell forward in shame, and he finally sank into the chair, his shoulders shaking. It was over. There was no more running, no more hiding. And now, I said softly, you will face the consequences of your actions. As the room fell into a heavy silence, the full magnitude of the crime was clear. The investigation had come to an end. The murderer had been unmasked, the secrets uncovered, and the truth, so carefully concealed for so long, was finally exposed. But as I looked around at the stunned faces of those in the room, I couldn't help but feel that this case, too, had left a deeper, more lasting mark. For every mystery solved, there were always others that lingered just out of reach, hidden in the shadows. Chapter 15. The grand dénouement. The silence that filled the room after Lord Whitcomb's confession was almost suffocating. The weight of the truth seemed to hang in the air, and the very walls of the Whitcomb estate, which had once echoed with grandeur, now seemed to close in on the man who had thought he could escape the consequences of his actions. I stood there, calmly observing, letting the gravity of the situation sink in for everyone present. No one spoke. No one moved. There was no need for further words just yet. The truth had been revealed, and now there was nothing left but to let the law take its course. Lord Whitcomb, his face drained of colour, sat in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor, unwilling or perhaps unable to meet the gazes of those around. Mrs. Frobisher, had retreated to a corner, her face pale, her hand pressed to her chest, as though trying to contain the shock that still seemed to reverberate through her. It was clear that the truth had crushed her in a way she had not anticipated. Despite her suspicions, I took a step forward and addressed the room. It is not often that one is faced with such a delicate web of lies, but in the end, the truth always comes to light. The threads you thought would remain hidden, Lord Whitcomb, have all been pulled apart. Lord Whitcomb shifted in his seat, but said nothing. His gaze remained fixed downward, as if the weight of the truth had pinned him to the spot. The motive, I continued, was simple enough. Fear. Fear of scandal, fear of losing everything, and so in the darkness of your own mind, you chose to eliminate the one thing that threatened it all, your secret affair with Lillian, your child, your disgrace. It was an action born of cowardice, not just towards your reputation, but towards those who trusted you. You thought you could hide her body forever, but as you well know now, no grave, no lie, no deception can keep the truth buried indefinitely. The room remained still, save for the occasional shuffle or sigh from the onlookers. There was no denying the finality in my voice. The case had been solved, the truth laid bare. And as much as Lord Whitcomb may have hoped otherwise, justice was about to be served. I did what I had to do, Lord Whitcomb finally spoke, his voice low, almost inaudible.
I couldn't let anyone know. It was all I could do to keep everything from falling apart. And so, I said, allowing the weight of the words to land squarely on him, you took a life to preserve your own, but your crime was not just murder.
It was the murder of trust, the murder of your own family, and most poignantly, the murder of innocence. You took the life of a young woman who had every right to live, to make her own choices, but you thought you could simply erase her existence to save your own skin. He didn't respond to that. He couldn't. There were no words that could undo what he had done, no justifications that could erase the truth. His eyes remained locked on the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I turned to the others in the room, my gaze sweeping over the faces of the remaining guests, all of whom had now witnessed the unravelling of the Whitcomb family's darkest secrets. Their expressions varied, some sympathetic, some horrified, and others, like Mrs. Frobisher, simply numb from the shock. "I understand that this news has been difficult to digest," I said, my tone softer now. "But this is the way of justice, mes amis. Sometimes the path to truth is long, winding and painful, but it is always the only way to bring an end to a lie." It was at that moment that the constable, who had been waiting patiently at the door, stepped forward. His uniform, sharp and professional, seemed almost out of place in such a room, but his presence was a necessary one. With one brief nod from me, he advanced towards Lord Whitcomb. "It is time," I said, stepping aside to allow the constable to do his duty. Lord Whitcomb did not resist as he was led from the room, his hands bound in front of him, his expression one of complete resignation. His fate had been sealed by his own actions, and now the law would take its course. As the constable escorted him out, I turned back to the remaining individuals in the room. Mrs. Frobisher, still in shock, had not yet moved. The others exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do next. The air was thick with the sense that something final had taken place. Something irreversible. I allowed a moment of silence to pass before I addressed them again. Justice is served and the truth is clear. But there is still much to consider in the wake of this tragedy. Lillian's memory, the truth of what happened, will not be erased. It will stand as a testament to the consequences of deceit and fear. Weight of the words hung heavy in the room. No one spoke for a moment, and I could see in their eyes that they, too, were grappling with the full impact of what had just transpired. Finally, it was Mrs. Frobisher who spoke, her voice thick with emotion. But how could he do it? How could he have killed her? My sister. She was so full of life, so full of promise. I stepped towards her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Grief is a powerful thing, madame. And in your grief, in your need to protect the memory of your sister, you may have missed the signs. But now we know. The truth is never easy, but it is always necessary. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. I never wanted to believe it. I never wanted to think the worst of him. You had every right to doubt, I said gently. But sometimes the most terrible truths are the ones we refuse to see. The room seemed to quiet again, as if the very walls of the Whitcomb estate were absorbing the tragedy that had unfolded within them. And yet, despite the sorrow that lingered in the air, I could not help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. The mystery had been solved, the killer unmasked, and justice would be served. As I made my way toward the door, preparing to leave this village behind, I glanced one last time at the faces in the room. There was a sense of finality in the air, the lingering tension of a case concluded. But as I walked out into the cool night air, I knew that the Whitcomb family would never be the same again, and neither would the village that had once been so blissfully unaware of the darkness that had simmered beneath the surface. As I made my way down the path toward the waiting car, my mind turned briefly to the next case, to the next puzzle. There were always more to solve, more mysteries to untangle. But for now, this one had come to its conclusion. The truth had prevailed, and the little grey cells had triumphed once again. And as I reached the car, ready to leave the village behind, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The end of one mystery was simply the beginning of another.